Check one, two, check one, two, ba-do, ba-do, Concurrent viewers, stream health. The stream is healthy. That's good. I love it when things are healthy. Settings, closed captions. Let's see. Video unavailable. C'est pas bon, hein? C'est pas forcément trop bon, mais un essai. Concurrent viewers. An error occurred. Well, that's a shame. There we go. Alrighty, a teeny bit echoey but intelligible. So I have the microphone out. I was trying to get the studio quality sound. I used to make records and I have high standards for this. Bing, 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 bing. Alrighty. Just a little more studio work here, not too much. Well, good evening, Sunday night. First of all, these are good problems to have, because I'm in Missouri, of course, and I survived the tornadoes, and I was in their way. I was right in the tornado alley that had been established by Mother Nature, and she was very cross with us. And I've been in the Midwest now for 15 years, and that was fairly freaky. I've been in a few situations where there's a wall cloud, which is a phrase we did not know back in Vermont when I was growing up, and how that becomes a rotating wall cloud and all that. I've been in those, and those have not necessarily shaken me. This didn't shake me either. I've been here long enough. But the following day, you've got shingles all over the place. 10 dead. Did get woken up in the middle of the night having to shelter. It was a major event here in this part of the country, and 3 people died from a dust storm in Texas. I had somebody ask me if I thought that Trump's budgeting of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, was possibly responsible. And I do not think that any of the budget of the federal government caused this. I think you have weather of that sort in this part of the country. Plus a lot of stuff's changing, but it was a good reminder, as one gets from time to time, that Mother Nature very much is in charge. And she deserves a lot of respect. So the good news is I've survived, and we'll start there. So, for all those of you who are joining me from Twitterland, we've already got like a ton of good questions, and I want to get to them since they were so good. 2 seconds, please. Okay. So you can have the control panel out there. The chat rate. Chat rate says 0. Dropped frames, looks like it's pretty good. chat works. We're good. All right. Onward and downward. So I want to just start. Want to start with your questions, but overall, um, I think one of the things that's confusing a lot of people is that I don't seem freaked out by a lot of what I've seen. I just want to, um, I just want to be very clear that I don't trust these people as far as I can spit them, right? Um, like, and I don't blame anybody else anywhere for not trusting what they're seeing from these Trump folks. None of this makes normal sense. The behaviors, the decisions, it's totally abnormal. But my view of it is that we're finally on a level of abnormal that works, that is appropriate to how dysfunctional and criminal the world actually is. If you realize, you go back to how some of you started to know me in 2016, 17, we had this guy, Trump, who expressed a love of Vladimir Putin. A preference for Putin over Obama, which was weird because, one, we don't mention other heads of state when we're campaigning for president in the United States. We certainly don't compare them favorably to the American president. No one had ever done that before. And this raised a lot of questions about what Trump's relationship was to the Russians or anybody else. Of course, Hillary Clinton, for her part, raised the idea of Trump being a Putin puppet in one of the debates, which is ironic because Hillary, through the Clinton Foundation, had plenty of foreign backers, like more than almost any politician we've ever seen. Say what you will about a George H.W. Bush or even a George W. Bush. They're largely American constructs. Whereas the Clintons, after leaving the White House with their global initiative and their foundation, they had substantial ties, both of them, to foreign powers. And of course, Hillary Clinton served as Secretary of State in the first Obama administration. Jaleel says, I have an Echo, but it sounds cool. I like my Echoes to be tube and magnetic tape based. I actually like the Ibanez delay champ old pedals for guitars. Otherwise, I don't like Echoes, but if I can be understood, that's good. I will figure out the... this is actually going to bother me horribly because I like sound quality. Anyways, we will get to that. The Clintons had their own foreign issues, and yet Hillary raised the issues around Trump, which were valid, except also we now know that her campaign, particularly through the lawyers for the Clinton Foundation, which was a law firm called Perkins Coie, they had taken over from Paul Singer, who of course is a private equity fund manager, who's involved in Argentinian debt, and he's got a lot of ties to the Israelis and all over. He's very global himself. That the Clinton campaign worked with them on the Steele dossier fraud, which was a direct attempt to defraud the CIA and the FBI. And yet, she comes out and starts talking about he's got a Putin problem. It looks like those two efforts may have been linked. But anyways, I of course noticed that during the campaign in 2016, because there were some people trying to shop the Steele dossier to me to get me to pay attention to it, which I was like, what is going on here? And of course, if you look at Trump, there were plenty of Russia connections. There were plenty of every type of connection if you go back. He did business all over the world. His brand was brought all over the world. There's pictures of his daughter with a hard hat on in Baku, Azerbaijan. And I think, as I've said before, both the behavior during the campaign and the behavior immediately after Trump won was so alarming that I noticed. And the behavior of a lot of players was disturbing, whether it was the good guys acting very, very nervous for what was happening, or the bad guys acting very, very elated. So that led me to a certain emotional state as well. I was quite alarmed, as were most of the people that I trust in the business of national security. In fact, those who were, uncanny in their calm, I still look back at that and I have some questions. But you fast forward past the 4 years of Trump, which were not very good, and then the 4 years of Biden, which may have been beset by more internal problems than people have understood. Like, perhaps I think the average person does not realize just how problematic the U.S. government has been in terms of infiltration by people that do not share democratic values. And that may be people who are, crooks, who are bent on profiting from the U.S. government and not benefiting the taxpayers, on up to foreign agents sent here to try and destroy democracy from within. And of course, it is really a case-by-case basis who that is. And I think it really is case by case. How do you separate out somebody who is merely self-interested, greedy, representing their family's fortune, perhaps, or a full-blown Russian intelligence officer? Or somebody lying in wait from the British Crown who wants their colonies back, which, believe it or not, there is some of that out there. How do you tell from person to person what that is, especially in a group of institutions so big that it's hard for most people to understand? The U.S. budget every year is several $1 trillion. A trillion is 1,000 billion. And you're talking about multiple of those. It is hard for the average person to recognize how much money that is and how many individuals it has been, it's comprised of. So if you look at corruption in the U.S. government, how does the average person perceive it? Even feds, or should I say government employees of the United States federal government, or govies as we might call them in D.C., people who are on the GS scale, they're GS-14s, GS-15s, or in the senior executive service. They are civil servants. They even have trouble understanding the totality of what's out there. And once you get that into private contractors, when you start considering the role of privatization of the government, whether it is contractors such as Accenture or Deloitte, or even people that are working on single source contracts or personal services contracts, which is to say they may have avoided the scrutiny that the average contractor would go through. It's very difficult for anybody to know just who is receiving money from the U.S. government and just what they're doing with it. And when you start looking at both public corruption and counterintelligence matters in the United States, you will find a whole lot of people in the U.S. government who are doing things that none of you would most likely enjoy. So here we are in the Trump administration 2.0, which is very, very different. There's no Mike Pompeo. There's no Jared Kushner. We can just sit back and take that in for half a sec. There's no Jared Kushner this time. There's no Ivanka. She's not around. There's no permanent security clearances, which don't exist. There's a whole lot of stuff that I, got known for in 2017 and 2018 and beyond, like explaining basic concepts of the U.S. government that I don't need to do this time. Because in 2017, you had things like Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner are in the White House, and they both conspired, reportedly, to get rid of the intelligence community and the Joint Chiefs of Staff off the National Security Council. Now, you might ask yourself, what is the NSC going to talk about without the spies and the military? Like, who is left looking after national security if you take all the spooks and the generals off, like I think it's down like the Girl Scouts and the Salvation Army at that point, you know, the Audubon Society. So, like one of the first executive orders that Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon tried was to, by executive order, take the spies and military off the National Security Council. Now, it didn't work because executive orders only work in absence of the law. If there isn't a statute that has been, established by Congress and, appropriations and all that, if you don't have that in place, the executive office can, on a temporary basis, just issue an order. We allow this in the case that some emergency comes up, that the president, who's really the last individual with authority to help us in our times of need, the ultimate authority in the United States, surely counterbalanced by the legislative branch, counterbalanced by the Supreme Court. Pretty genius system. We still want it to be one person who can make a call, avoid a nuclear catastrophe, whatever it is. But that's supposed to be temporary. It's supposed to be in case of emergency. And because the National Security Council was established by statute by the Congress, Trump couldn't just get rid of all the spies and the Pentagon out of the thing. And it was one of the crazier things that I saw back then. So I had to come out and explain stuff like this. Or people are talking about Jared Kushner having a security clearance. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. What about his family that is selling condos to the Chinese in exchange for EB-5 visas? This is the kind of thing that will come up on your application for a security clearance and will generally say no. Maybe, theoretically, there is some exception to this, but I can't imagine, and I couldn't imagine what it might be. That he was leaving several gajillion dollars of his family's dodgy real estate deals off his application. And when you sign an SF-86 form, which is what I started ranting about in January of 2018 or whenever it was, I was explaining to the general public what an SF-86 form is. Because the general public, unlike DC, everybody has to fill out one of these. It's pretty normal if you're going to have any sort of classified information that you have to access. But for the rest of America that's normal, they don't know what this is. So they may never have filled out this form that at the bottom of every form says, yes, if I lie to you, if I leave stuff out, I'm going straight to prison, man. Well, the Trump 1.0 was full of stuff like that where, I got a lot of play on social media explaining the basics of the federal government to people. I don't have to do that now. It's very limited. It's very interesting to me. There's a lot of stuff that seems alarming, but at least I see right now a bunch of stuff being done that I've kind of been hoping for a long time. A lot of it is much more extreme than I would have thought. Then again, I don't have a full picture of just how bad things might be. I'll give you an example of one of Trump's policies from right now that is more extreme than I expected, but it's on a topic that I'm not surprised to see. And it's the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. They're being shut down in different ways. I'm not going to Google it right now. I forget if they're shutting the entire agency down. I think they're moving it into the State Department, which makes sense. It's part of our diplomatic relationship with the world, but it has a strange structure that I think has not been particularly conducive to success in the world. It has subcontractors, major subcontractors. It's a company called Chemonics, CHEMONICS, and DAI, Development Alternatives International. So did you follow that? You've got USAID that has underneath it a private company called DAI that does the economic development and other international development out in the rest of the world. So you have the US government, then USAID, then you have private contractors. And I'm not sure how many other contractors other than these two main ones. But I worked with some of those groups back in the day, and I saw some major corruption. There was a matter that involved the country of Bolivia that led to the election of Evo Morales, who turned out to be a very anti-democratic figure who worked very closely with some of the drug trafficking cartels. And it's a very long story as to how that happened, but the USAID contractors basically um, got a bunch of people off of their day-to-day living that was collecting coca leaves, which I might add have more use than just cocaine for people of native descent in that part of the world. There's medicinal value, there's cultural value. I'm not an expert in this. I have no use for coca leaves or any of its derivative products in my life, but others do. And so there were people in Bolivia who were collecting the stuff up, and they were being pushed around by USAID contractors to suddenly switch to hearts of palm. They would be growing this tree and then harvesting it in certain ways to provide this palmitos, this vegetable for salads. You may have had it on salads if you've been at like a Cuban restaurant or something like that. Now, you probably know this, but there's a lot different profitability between salad toppings and cocaine. So these people ended up starving. I gather they had like cholera or scurvy. I mean, it got really bad. And out of that terrible situation, from the Chapare region of Bolivia came this guy, Evo Morales, who immediately linked up with Hugo Chavez's administration in Venezuela and the Cuban regime. And those are deeply anti-democratic, anti-human rights regimes. They're enemies of America, really. And I was a witness to this. There was no path for an Evo Morales without the United States getting involved in this way that was incompetent, if not cruel. And that's just one example. I know of others, but that one I was actually there for. So when they came for USAID and said, hey, we're gonna take this and we're gonna put it back in the State Department, we're gonna have more direct authority from the executive branch. That's something that seems to me like it's about 20 years overdue, minimum. Because America is tarnished by that kind of activity. The bad guys need people starving because of America in the rest of the world. The bad guys need America to be less like America, competent, kind, interested in good for all. And from what I'd seen, USAID was at least far from perfect on that stuff. So when they go and start making major changes, which I think we're overdue, you see this one kind of reaction, caterwauling, of, oh, think of all the wonderful things we do with these institutions. And we're seeing this with a lot of government functions that I don't think Americans really have a defined opinion about how efficacious they are. I think the Trump people are moving on a number of organizations that have some compromise issues. Apparently, they're taking shots at Columbia University. And Senator Josh Hawley, and I will tell you, for those of you who know me, he has not necessarily been, a politician I've normally aligned with. You may remember him from, his apparent support of the January 6th rioters, and he is one of my two senators here in Missouri. But of late, after plenty of the investigation of the Jan 6 stuff has come out, Senator Hawley is he's on Team Good Guy a lot. He's not made in the lab for me. He's not like my favorite. But he's been coming hard at people who would force children into slave labor. Well, I like that if you know my work. And he's been going at our Environmental Protection Agency to protect people in St. Louis from all this radiation that's been left in the ground since World War II. That's a bigger deal than people understand. And so of late, he comes out and says, hey, a lot of these giant universities are just hedge funds stuffed with foreign money that are indoctrinating our kids, and then they're making the money on the back end, having the kids go off and do all this stuff with the tech sector, make money, and then they dump their money back into the hedge fund. And I'm like, what? Because that's correct. And he says, wait a minute, these guys have enough money. They don't need federal funding. So let's cut off Columbia University. Now, if you've ever been doing any kind of counterintelligence stuff, you'll run into Columbia University more than average. There's a lot going on there, and it involves foreigners that may not have democratic ideals firmly in mind. So this strikes me as fundamentally different than Trump 1.0. Another major thing, probably the major thing, is the first thing they're going at is the cartels. And I want you to remember that you have some of the most violent criminals in history armed with Israeli spyware that we know about. It could be much else. For all we know, they have God-tier access to Facebook and Twitter and our phones. I don't know. I know there's a lot of different spyware out there that should not be circulating. I'm sure ain't the NSA who's running it. It's your local sheriff who's got a copy. It's a real problem. So you have people that are fundamentally super violent who are trafficking children. They are trafficking fentanyl, hiding it in different recreational drugs, just killing people all over the place. And if you look at the recent revelations of the crematorium in Mexico that is supposedly operated by the Jalisco cartel, these people are on the level of the Nazis and potentially on the scale thereof. You start talking about killing hundreds of thousands of people via opiates, you're getting up there. You talk about all the people, judges, politicians, journalists, regular people, witnesses, down in Mexico and other countries in order to keep those drugs flowing. You're starting to talk about major human rights crimes there. Is it to the scale of World War II? Well, we don't know yet. That was in the single to double digit millions. Plenty enough, right? It depends on how we count, but we're starting to reckon with it. And right now, the Trump administration is shutting that border as tight as possible. And they're scooping up people that have been all over this country, particularly the middle of the country and the border regions. And they are loading these guys who are extremely dangerous onto transports run by the military. They're being collected up by the Marine Corps and others. And they're being sent away from this country. And that is a net good. And when you know how much money that they have put into the pockets of corrupt public officials, you begin to see a pattern emerge of a lot of our problems stemming from these criminal organizations that have no ties to the United States. And several of these people have been deported 5-6 times. So they were caught and deported during Bush 43, during Obama, during Trump, during Biden, and they're back. So there has been a problem with our border security for a long time. A serious one. So serious that you can be killing people with fentanyl and be back as soon as you're gone. There's very clearly a problem with the border, in many senses. I think we're going to see a scale of corruption there that is going to shock people. And this is the prelude to that. Now, again, I'm going to back up. I know you're not prepared, generally, to think about the Trump administration doing anything very useful. Lord knows his first 4 years as president, they weren't very helpful. In fact, they probably made some of these problems much worse. So I'm as shocked as you are, but here we are. I'm going to take a question here from Edoso. Oh man, good to see you, my friend Tom. What are your thoughts, Eric, on the Trump people having their background checks being moved from FBI to the Pentagon? I love this question. The FBI has been getting gutted. It has been getting cleaned out. We have had a couple different special agents in charge, acting or full, here in St. Louis, where the FBI has had some issues. We've had a rotation of a couple, and the latest is fairly recent. One of the things the FBI does is counterintelligence. Who else does counterintelligence is the Pentagon through the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they, I believe, manage the clearances. I believe they have a master list of the clearances. There's some roles split between CIA and DIA, is my understanding of it. It is not a complete understanding. There are people with a lot more expert knowledge about how that works. A bunch of that expert knowledge is classified, so I'm in a bit of a bind there. But bottom line, Tom, the Pentagon is way better at doing background checks of a serious variety than the FBI would be. I think the FBI is not resourced properly to do the scale of background checks that are needed, and I'm not certain that the institution has been functional enough to do a serious job. So, they started talking about how, they're not going to have their background checks. Nobody's getting background checked, which, again, let's go back to what I was talking about, Jared Kushner, where very clearly, this guy filled out an SF-86 form. He lied on it. He lied by omission, and he didn't go to prison. He also didn't go to prison during Biden's administration. Now, the FBI and the DOJ are supposed to prosecute without fear or favor and without political influence. However, if we take as a given that Trump might have been putting a thumb on the scale during his first administration, then ostensibly that thumb would have been off during Biden. And yet, there were a lot of people who committed clear violations of the law just in getting their security clearances, not what they did once they had access to national defense information, which we focused on the boxes of classified information, classified documents in the bathroom at Trump's golf course. Yeah, that was not to my liking. Anybody serious would be pretty alarmed by that. But it's only now that we have Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. She's coming out and she is naming names of all these media organizations that apparently have been getting access to classified intelligence under the guise of whistleblowing, which I thought we already talked about this, all this WikiLeaks stuff, that no, classified defense information going to news outlets is not journalism at all. It's not been until Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard that they're cracking down on this. And it's been a huge problem for a long time. So, I'm in a pickle here, folks. After the first 4 years of Trump's presidency and the 4 years of his post-presidency, there's not much there for me to like. And yet, we have USAID being brought back into the State Department. We have background checks going back into our Defense Department rather than our law enforcement. Which, doesn't that make sense if we are beset by foreign agents all over the place? That we would rather that we would have national security institutions like the Pentagon, which, yes, the FBI has a critical national security role. It does. Because there's an overlap between crime and counterintelligence. But the Pentagon has 9 intelligence agencies, including the NSA and the NGA, which are the big ones. So if you want to know what somebody's up to, that's really the place to go. The FBI has not got the juice for that. So, yeah, do I not trust the Trump administration in principle? Absolutely. Am I seeing stuff that is exactly the way you'd want it to go? We got foreign agents everywhere. Let's have the people able to really get it. Who's a threat? Do the background before we let these folks in the White House. Guys, that's pretty good. You know? We don't want the national narrative being sculpted by people who have access to national defense information. And supposedly, in order to save us, they want to compromise that national defense information. Anything marked top secret, my friends, is considered a grave risk to national security, as in the United States might be gravely damaged, seriously harmed by anybody hearing about it. People could die. Maybe lots of people. And that's the thing about the classification and the control of information, compartmentalization. You don't know what's going to happen if this gets out. We have the Trump administration stepping forth going, no, the media can't do this anymore. And if you look at the behaviors around a lot of narratives, but particularly the Steele dossier, the conflation of the real interaction of Trump's people with the Russians, to wit, Trump and Paul Manafort giving data from the Republican Party to Konstantin Kilimnik, who was very clearly a Russian intelligence officer, that was conflated with the Steele dossier, which was a fraudulent intelligence product by a foreign national, a Brit by the name of Christopher Steele, and the media confused Americans intentionally. They made it sound like the work of the Robert S. Mueller III investigation, which was very complete, very serious, and found all sorts of incriminating information. Every time they took a step forward, our national news media conflated with the Steele dossier, which walked right into the way of guys like Jim Jordan, who would say, oh, this is the Russia hoax. Well, here's the thing. The Steele dossier was a Russia hoax. All the other Russians were not a Russia hoax. Those were just Russians who were messing around with our election. And the media was critically involved in that. So smacking them and getting them to behave, like prosecuting people who are involved in the trafficking of defense information under the Espionage Act, that's a net good. You don't want somebody at NBC News trafficking nuclear plants. There was a case of this guy, Kyle Freese. I don't know if he's still in prison. I do know that it was pretty funny when I saw him making fun of me on Twitter, and then he got indicted because he worked at the Pentagon, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he was DMing chicks he was dating classified intelligence over Twitter DMs. Now, I don't know how many of you have worked for the Pentagon, but I don't know if you know that you can't do that. They get, like, really angry if you DM any classified intelligence on Twitter. I never did it, Also, I don't know if any of you are dating, but I just, who gets hot over that? Spies? like, hey, let's go dancing. Or, I cook really well. I mean, that seems like some game. But, hey, I have access to our assessment of laser weapons on Chinese naval vessels, which is what Mr. Freese was trafficking to employees of NBC. I don't know who gets hot and bothered about that other than foreign agents. It seems to fail on both the national security and the digital dating levels. I don't know. Seems pretty bad. Yeah. My general theme. Yeah, these guys aren't my cup of tea, but they keep doing stuff I really like. So I'm as emotionally confused as you. Patrick O'Neill, says, does his diplomacy with Europe and Canada and the way he treated Zelensky concern you? I did a video on this channel, and if you haven't subscribed, please do so, and you can check out my video all about what I think happened during that Zelensky meeting. And I wanted to remind everybody that both these men are screen actors, that Trump is an actual member of the Screen Actors Guild, and Zelensky had a comedy show on Netflix, as well as back in his home Ukraine, called Servant of the People, which is a show about a high school teacher who gets popular because he goes viral when one of his students shoots a video of him yelling about how corrupt Ukrainian politicians are, and then he ends up as president. It's actually a very good show. It's very well produced, and Zelensky is a great comedian. He has great comic timing in both the Ukrainian language and English. He does a thing where he's gotten a call from Angela Merkel from Germany, and he's speaking English to her, and he's funny in English too. I don't know how many comedians you know who are funny in Ukrainian in addition to English, but I think it's pretty rare. So Trump sits down with Zelensky, and he's like yelling at him, and Zelensky is like, "Oh, I said thank you. No, it's okay." And kind of the denouement of that was that the Europeans, and particularly the United Kingdom, committed more to being the ones who would manage the rehabilitation and the reconstruction of Ukraine. And, they're firmly opposing the Russian Federation in their war, just as we're going to conclude it. Do I think everybody was being sincere in those moments? I don't think any diplomats are sincere. I think these are all actors who were generally too homely for Hollywood. When I lived in Washington, we said this is Hollywood for ugly people. And everybody knows what move they're trying to play on the chessboard. And in the case of Trump and Zelensky, it seemed a little bit like vaudeville to me. But what's the ultimate end there? We want Ukraine to be more integrated in Europe. And America has more than enough to do with Canada and Mexico trying to secure its homeland. And we also want NATO countries to spend more on defense. And, there's some other levels to this. There's a lot of money that, the United States donated to NATO or spent on its national security apparatus. In other words, paying the military-industrial complex of the United States. General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and other contractors. So we would also sell a bunch of equipment to the Europeans they would buy stuff from our companies, and then that stuff got used in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. And I'll just tell you that after the Iraq War started up in 2003, and I just did a video about how we were lied into it by the CIA and others. The cars in my neighborhood in Northwest DC went from BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes to Bentleys and Rolls-Royces in a short period of time. And that was not good. So the idea that we're going to have Europe take care of its own defense industry and slew us less money through our military-industrial complex, that might not have been things that anybody was thinking about, but it might be a net good. Now, Trump's diplomacy with Canada was far more hilarious because, we're going to make it the first state, we're the 51st state. It's like, of course he wasn't. But we want Canada less dependent on the United Kingdom and more interested in taking care of its own national security, including policing up the border. I think I've said this in a past live stream and maybe a past video. I think that that was a way to be very cartoonish and get the Canadian people fired up about defending themselves. And we're really a safe enemy for them because we're not their enemy. They're our closest ally, and there's nobody who's a closer second to that. We have a very tight trading relationship. that we may temporarily need to slow down in terms of the shipments made across the borders, both the Canadian and the Mexican border, as we tighten things up, as we get rid of the cartels, we frankly we want to catch whether or not they are gonna replace their normal fentanyl shipments or whatever, or uh, corrupt aluminum shipments with other bioweapons. We're in a dangerous time here. We're ripping out a multi-trillion-dollar enterprise. There are a lot of considerations for that, and slowing down our trading relationship briefly to make sure as we make this swap out that we don't have massive casualties from bioweapons or chemical weapons or nuclear or something. That is the kind of thing national security professionals think about. The average person may not, and we might not want them to focus on it. So we've had a brief bit of public tension with our closest friends, allies, neighbors. And as I may have explained in past live streams, I'm from up by the Canadian border. I'm from right near the border of Quebec. I speak both languages. I pass as Canadian when I go up there, when I hit the border. I've been, believe it or not, I've been harassed for my paperwork. I've been asked how long I've had work permits in the United States. I'm like, 45 years. You know, I couldn't have more affection for Canadians. So I've not been worried. I've been like, okay, so, there's a bit of hockey goon stuff going on here. And it's funny, they had a little meme of Canadians sticking out their elbows. Now, if you're not a big hockey fan, you don't know what that means. That, sticking out the elbow on someone is meaning when you get in the corners, when you get in the dirty areas, you're gonna elbow them in the face. And that is prelude to a hockey fight, right? Canadians are both the most polite people you've ever met and the most likely to punch you in the course of a sporting event that is not boxing. These things are not in competition with one another, I don't figure. And so I just saw that as like, yeah, these are the Canadians getting fired up. Like, the funny thing, that is not, them threatening a terrorist attack on us. That's not saying that, they're going to bomb Buffalo, New York. They're just like, they got the elbow out. We'll stick the elbow down on you. And I was like, okay, they're getting fired up. They won the Four Nations face-off a few weeks ago, and everyone was super fired up. They're like, we're the first nation of hockey. And, I couldn't have been happier about it. And look, they just got their first new prime minister in 9 years. Justin Trudeau is out. Mark Carney is in. And they're getting rid of the carbon tax. They are unifying. They're not going to be torn apart anymore by, if you're not Canadian, you should look into this Pierre Poilievre. I don't make too many comments about Canadian politics because I'm American and I don't want to use my public figure status to mess with them. I get my opinions though. And this Pierre Poilievre guy refuses to submit to a background check. He's the leader of the opposition, essentially. He's the leader of the Tories in Canada. And he refuses to have a background check so that he could have a security clearance. So I have some questions, and so does everybody else. And Poilievre's, era seems to be about over. This Carney guy is moving towards the middle. So if you look at that series of events altogether, you've got Trump gets mouthy. They put up a picture of Mont Blanc or the Matterhorn or one of them in Switzerland, and they have a picture of the Canadian flag, which is like the dumbest image possible. It's like, Canada's the 51st state, which of course nobody intends. Not even him. There's nothing that will be gained by the United States taking control of Prince Edward Island. Are we going to get potatoes? Are we going to have more access to lobster from Nova Scotia? Are we going to take over the Canadian strategic maple syrup reserve, which is a thing, by the way, and it is very mobbed up? Are we going to take that over? No. And if you have ever looked into the complexities of Quebec Canadian politics, as in the French population in the province of Quebec and some other provinces, but generally Quebec, the secession movements, and the language politics of all that. If you knew how complex and controversial, like whether or not you had the word start or démarrer in the corner of your Windows computer program, you would never want to invade Canada, no matter what they had there. All the money on earth, ambrosia, you know, the secret of eternal life. You would not invade Canada. Lisa Roy says, yes, Poilievre's refusal to get the security clearance is very suspicious. Musk likes Poilievre, says it all. Yes, Lisa. Yes, it does. And the Northern Passage, now that's much more interesting. That is something that deserves some discussion. With the global climate change, might there be more of a passage that everyone's been looking for, the Northwest Passage, that would be running trade up around the ice caps instead of down through the Panama Canal? Yeah, there would be something to that, and it would absolutely be, for example, in Russian and Chinese interest to have the United States not have military control over the Arctic in that way, which is interesting. So the question then would be, how much foreign pressure has been put on Canada if they're expecting global warming to open up that passage? Would it then be in the interest of these foreign powers to have a lever in Canada? Absolutely. Have they? Absolutely. India, China, Russia, Saudi, others. They've all been looking to compromise Canadian politicians, buy up land, compromise the relationship between Canadian law enforcement, Canadian military with their American partners. Not only has it been in their interest, they've taken action on it. And the Canadian government has been releasing somewhat detailed reports on foreign interference that generally have been about China and Russia. And it leaves out a lot of different malign groups and a lot of different countries that have an influence on Canada. Like, how about the United Kingdom? Not everybody in the UK has the interests of democracy, and the UK has tons of influence on Canada. But the Hogue Report did not get into that, and that's probably just as well. Talking about talking about Russia and China, probably enough. The whole idea is we need sovereignty. I'm very interested to see the changes in Canada, and it looks like their government is resilient and getting more resilient. Melanie Joly is coming in with an expanded role as a Minister of the Foreign Affairs, and the Canadians are going to be more involved in international aid, which is interesting. We are getting our international aid put more under the State Department. Canada's expanding their role. It's very interesting. I wonder if we're going to strengthen each other's democracies and we're going to interact with the rest of the world with more coordination than we've had before. That's pretty interesting. That's a very positive trend, I think. Wendy asks, is Trump going to be stopped? I'm going to answer your question in the most annoying way possible, with an answer. That's a not annoying way to answer a question with an answer. To answer a question with another question. Is anybody going to run serious Democratic candidates in Missouri? You had two basically open congressional seats here, 2nd District and I think the 8th District. That would be Ann Wagner and Jason Smith. They were not energetic candidates. They're not super well liked. They were very vulnerable. And the Missouri Democratic Party was run by Russ Carnahan, who is a registered foreign agent of Venezuela. And he did not run serious candidates for governor or for attorney general, nor for the Congress. So if we want to stop this Trump guy, well, the only way we do that in our system is we have somebody who's not in his political party who might win. Hard to do that when you don't field candidates seriously. And no matter what you felt about Biden or Harris as candidates, that process, what happened there, especially the Democrats trying to take the president's legs out from under him in a sensitive time in the electoral year there, June, July of 2024, the notion that somehow he should pass the torch, that was not good electoral strategy. So my question is, are we going to have an opposition party? Because the Democratic Party is a severely dysfunctional organization. And it's funny, you have the media with different Democratic ties and Democratic elected officials who they've just gone right into their, opposition party mode. And it seems like bad theater. It doesn't seem like a serious attempt to govern. And getting on Twitter as a senator or a congressman and saying, this thing just happened and it's really bad and I'm going to work hard to make sure it doesn't happen. That is not the same as government. That is not the same as governing. And, it's 2025. There's a congressional election. There's an election for national office next year. It's in 18 months. Is Missouri going to still have a foreign agent on the payroll of right-wing Venezuelans running the opposition party? Every seat matters in the Congress. So for all of you who want to get rid of this Trump guy, and I don't blame you, perhaps that starts with the Democratic Party. Perhaps there should be penalties in terms of your career as a political strategist or manager or engineer or communications professional for bad action. And there hasn't been. I know I ran a campaign for statewide office this past year, and the behavior was deplorable, to put it mildly. Not only were they not supportive here in Missouri, they attacked me personally. They attacked the candidate personally and continue to do so. So we wonder why Trump's around. I mean, I'm not saying that this is not a commentary on how I ran or didn't run a campaign, nor on the candidate. This is a statement about a party that refused to take somebody's filing fee, and they had a private labor union law firm step in and claim to be running the Democratic Party when they had absolutely no legal authority to do so. And a foreign agent in charge who refused to step in and deal with that issue. I mean, and that's all the backdrop of the Democratic Party nationally not deciding whether or not, they knew which candidate they wanted and having to swap out candidates, in the middle of the summer with a very weird process. And a very entertaining convention. That was just on a showbiz standpoint. I decided that we definitely need DJs in Congress, in between all the speeches. I don't know. It just, that really, from an entertainer's perspective, that really worked for me. But that was the only damn thing, to be honest. So, our friend Tamara Sablewing says, yes, there seemed to be more theater about the Democrats in different methods from the Republicans, but still theater for both. Absolutely. That is my sense of it. The Democrats give the impression of being sincere. And once you figure out how to fake being sincere, the world is your oyster. The Republicans, this is one big Andy Kaufman routine as far as I'm concerned. Like, they are well into theater of the absurd. Which is, I think, why everyone's having trouble sort of tracking it all. Again, I don't blame anybody, like, it's weird. But that's where we are. Martine Reed says, the problem with electronic communication and harassment is that we really don't know who's behind it. I cannot tell you how much I sympathize with that view as somebody who's received some global transnational repression on a pretty intense level. I wonder how much longer Twitter is going to be around. It doesn't seem to have any of the controls built in that YouTube does. TikTok is already under federal investigation, many different ways. Facebook as well. I really wonder whether or not Twitter will be around at all. But in general, though, having platforms that can be used for transnational repression to attack our democracies, it's just not going to fly. But before it's gone, I'm going to return to a few more questions here from the Twitter. Let's see. There are reports that Musk singled out, at least initially, agencies and departments investigating his businesses. CF, the Consumer Finance Protection Board, Tesla, the Federal Aviation Administration, SpaceX, etc. Is it true? And if so, how is he able to get away with that? So, yes, Mr. Musk's activities are very strange, are they not? So, it's interesting. Musk supposedly came in to be the administrator of the U.S. Digital Service, which was renamed the U.S. Doge Service pursuant to an executive order. I'm going to check the U.S. Digital Service website right now in real time to see if anybody has changed the website to say who is running it. No, and the website seems half broken at this point, which is ironic because it was created. I'll be able to share my screen in future editions of this, but the U.S. Digital Services website is apparently broken, and it was created because the digital service was created in 2012 because the rollout of healthcare.gov was such a disaster. And this is bizarre because the U.S. government, of course, actually invented the internet, literally. Not necessarily Al Gore, but it's the Department of Defense and DARPA invented the internet. And then we had a bunch of weird tech dudes from Google come out to tell the government that invented the internet how to use the internet. That was weird. And so the question was about Musk and what's going on there. So Musk steps in DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, right? And they just rename the U.S. Digital Service, the U.S. Doge Service. Musk is not officially anything right now. He is not officially the administrator of that service. It does not say so on their website. That doesn't work. He has no authority, and in fact, Trump said in one of his cabinet meetings in front of Musk, he said, "Of course, Musk doesn't have any power. It's all you guys who are secretaries of your departments. You're the ones with authority, and you're doing everything, right?" Which that's legal. That's true. The administrator of the EPA can make decisions about EPA. So he kind of tipped the hand about that Elon wasn't really running any of this. And yet the media was telling us all over the place that he was running all this stuff. And it makes sense that he wasn't because he doesn't have any legal authority to do so. And even if you have somebody in the White House who claims to have authority, there's so many bureaucratic things you got to do, things you got to file, calls you make to certain phone numbers, that you can't just do something. It's too complicated a system for that. Now, if you have some civil servants there who know how to run things, and then they are telling the secretary, hey, here's what you do, then you can get a bunch of stuff done very quickly. That is the balance between the political appointees and the civil servants, so that the will of the President of the United States is reflected more in the running of the agency. You have the civil servants there, your GS-14s and 15s, who are there really making the thing work. But you don't want elections not to have consequences, so your political appointees, are there. They need to be able to change things about the various departments in order to reflect the policies that the American people voted for. And we were told that this was all completely perverse and that Elon Musk was running the government. Except he's not. Because he can't. Because it's not possible. So, I think Elon is being a rodeo clown right now. I think he is, being set up as the black sheep. He's having everything blamed on him. And I think he's done so many things that are cognizable as felonies. If nothing else, just his securities fraud in several of his companies. It sure seems like the way he purchased Twitter, he was not all the way honest with his stockholders, his shareholders. Let's just put it that way. So, was he forced into this to take the heat off the actual people changing the U.S. government, at a time that we're getting rid of decades worth of like drug cartel infiltration? That may be so. I mean, he doesn't have an official position. And a lot of what he does doesn't make sense. So, and Jalil says he needs jail time. I can see how you would reach that conclusion. Also, seems like a lot of Trump's picks are there to be thrown under the bus. I think this is the underside of the bus. I think Kash Patel is on the underside of the bus. This is my view of it. I think people like Tulsi Gabbard are not. I still have questions about her going to see Bashar al-Assad in 2012, but that was really wild. Yes, Tamara says, I expect Elon to be sacrificed at some point. He seems to be acting like a shield distraction for others. Agreed. You went to prison for graffiti. Okay. That's the level of felons I like around here. Just the light stuff. Just the light stuff. Patrick O'Neill asks, random, but what are your feelings on Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, the congresswoman? She constantly surprises. I think she has a real national security bent. And while she was definitely not sort of designed for me as a candidate to be my ideal archetype of something, I find her to be an extremely erudite and professional public servant who has more and better policies for national security than almost all of her colleagues. So I didn't start a fan, but I am a fan. Going back to Twitter, Anjurek asks, what media is trustworthy? Is there any? ProPublica. Don't watch TV news anymore. Can't stand any of them. I don't find too many media outlets that are being helpful. There's only one or two media outlets that I find to be particularly accurate. That's justice.gov and usaspending.gov. If you want to know what people are actually spending money on and what these different tech companies or this and that, who's getting cash and from which agencies, it's in there. It's indisputable. And there's so little in the world that is indisputable about the U.S. government or about how things are going, right? That stuff is so dry and so nerdy that that no one can fix it. You have to go to the website and go, all right, what is everybody spending money on? And you'll have your answer. That is not for public consumption, and we should have, or rather, it is for public consumption in that it is public data. But it's not easy to digest for the American people so that people understand the narrative. But the other one that's big is justice.gov, particularly the press releases about who they're prosecuting. There was a case this week about a law enforcement officer in Puerto Rico who diverted $170 that was going to be used in some investigation. I don't know if he took it or he kept someone else from getting it. I think it might have been property that was confiscated during a drug raid of some form. It was $170. They took him to trial. He didn't plead guilty. And it was a 5-day trial, which is very resource intensive for the U.S. Attorney's Office. And they got a conviction. And they came out with a press release and they said, yeah, any act of public corruption, no matter how small, harms us. So don't do it. We will take you to trial and we will send you to prison, like this guy. That is real news. That is a change. That's a change in policy. That's a change in how they are deciding to prosecute. You're also seeing a lot of prosecutions of Customs and Border Patrol officers who are various kinds of dirty, or people interfering in health and human services, that be Medicare and Medicaid and other issues. They're interfering in their Office of Inspector General investigations. OIG is there to investigate the corruption in the agency. And it is staffed, the OIG's office is staffed by special agents, just like the FBI, only they specialize in, like Amtrak OIG specializes in fraud that involves, our national railways. HHS, pretty much anything involving healthcare, so they have a lot going on. They're not just prosecuting the fraudsters, they're prosecuting people messing with the investigations. That, that is important. We're talking about getting at how we investigate corruption, because if you corrupt the investigators, then you don't get the crimes. So, let's see. So that is my version of the media, is what I meant. Is I just go right for the data, because it can't be diverted. ProPublica does some pretty good stories. I've liked them a lot in the in the past. But of late, it seems like they're very limited. They get so far with a story and then they stop. They'll talk about the immigrant laborers up in Wisconsin and the dairy farmers where somebody gets killed and it's not properly investigated, and that's all true. But they don't take the next step and go into, this is the cartels running illegal slave labor. Of course, that's dangerous. That'll get you, threatened. That'll get you killed. So I understand why not. But, so I don't read ProPublica anymore because I don't take the next step. And as far as the rest of the television and websites and stuff like that, just not a big fan. Interesting question. Why is ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, pausing drug smuggling and human trafficking investigations to go after First Amendment protected speech? And the clip that was proposed here is, it has been reported in America that over the past 2 months, ICE has been preparing an operation to arrest pro-Palestinian activists. The agency even reportedly paused its human trafficking and drug smuggling investigations, reportedly, okay, to have agents monitor social media for posts and likes from pro-Palestinian students. When you find out that a lot of the pro-Palestinian protesters may have been flown in here from overseas, as in they're not from here necessarily, you start to wonder if they get you coming and going all that Palestine stuff. And I don't believe for 1 second that the human trafficking and drug trafficking investigations are paused because they keep prosecuting the hell out of everybody. So that's, reportedly, that's a non-starter. So, Lisa Roy asks, are you saying the removal of all the IGs is a good thing? I'm not sure that they removed all the IGs. I know some of them were dismissed. I don't know the status of that. I think there's a lot of people who may have been occupying a position in the federal government who were there because they wouldn't take it too far. And it's time to take it too far. It's time to get wild. And it's going to get crazy. So, not everyone who says free Palestine cares about Palestinians. That's true. Palestine is a territory that includes Israel and used to sort of include a number of people that lived in that part of the world, and was managed by the Ottomans. It was then managed by the British Empire. And we set up a sovereign nation there that has been very, very troubled in 1948. And, you kind of lose track of everything that's going on with Netanyahu and Shin Bet and IDF, but they're finally moving different people around there. Where there's, I think Ronan Bar, the head of Shin Bet, may be stepping down. Who knows what's going on with Netanyahu? But, Palestine is very clearly set up as a geopolitical problem that can always take the oxygen out of every other debate the second certain people want it to. So, you start to wonder, is that maybe the whole point of that country? Yes, I understand there's supposed to be a homeland for certain folks, but the way it is used raises a lot of questions. And, you know, of course, if you are flying in agents provocateur from outside of the country, one of the agencies that would monitor that, especially if they've been removed in the past, would be ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So, Sarah Unsecker asks, is the FBI still concerned about people who lie on FARA registrations? If not, why not? Always a good question. I believe the FARA unit is under assault by the Trump administration. And look, I talk about foreign agents probably more than almost any other voice out there, right? And I'm not too worried about this one because the FARA unit doesn't work. I'm not saying that the people who run the Foreign Agents Registration Act database aren't doing their jobs. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you look at the number of primary registrants and foreign principals and short form registrants, and the total number of foreign agents who are obviously undertasking from some malign network, there's not a match. Like the FARA database was established in 1938, to oppose Nazis and Soviets, and it doesn't work. We've had scant enforcement of the law there for decades, and it's not really getting much better. You've got the same few law firms that are registering over and over and over again, and that's it. It's not really expanding. It's not. I don't think it's really set up well for the subtlety of its role. That there's a lot of subtlety in who is a foreign agent. If you convince somebody to act in their own self-interest, their own greed, for the benefit of Belgium or something, that might not be enough to trigger what currently is, the threshold for having a register under FARA. I'm not certain right now as I'm sitting here of what I would tell you about what I would do to neutralize those counterintelligence problems. But I can tell you it probably wouldn't look like what the FARA unit's doing right now. So again, these are problematic facets of the U.S. government that their failure or their lack of optimization is a real problem for us. Not understanding the role of Chinese money in our politics or in our science. We don't have a comprehensive way to understand that threat or neutralize it or report to the American people on how we're doing with it. We're just not doing it well at all. So we have to do better, to put it mildly. Lisa Roy asks, thoughts on Peter Thiel and his backing of J.D. Vance? Peter Thiel is a very interesting individual from the easternmost part of Germany back in the day. I'm speaking of some of his family members of other generations. And his role in the United States is very hard to understand. I do know that his family members tend to be there when it comes to uranium refinement and mining it and all that stuff. So I think we are getting to the end of some of the major questions here. Joseph Garcia asks, after the Oval Office meeting last year, drones started showing up and politicians were panicking. There's a subreddit dedicated to them in New Jersey, but they're seen elsewhere. Will they truly reveal themselves, or after this show they'll silently vanish? I think that was another one of these events that was created to take up some space in the news cycle. So, and the coordinated hyperventilation of certain politicians did not escape my attention. I think we're going to have a lot of that until we figure out how to figure out those networks and deal with that. Other than that, the United States has lots of ways to take care of its airspace. It's more of a Pentagon issue, and will involve classified information to which I am not privy. I think one of the last issues I want to deal with is some of the hyperventilation about Trump's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act to remove members of Tren de Aragua, which is a very murderous, lethal cartel. And you see this attempt to get everybody reflexive. You get an attempt to get you to feel about something before you know what you think about it. And I saw a lot of coordinated voices trying to attack the Trump administration's invocation of this law in order to get rid of these Venezuelan cartel guys. And I can say I'm pretty comfortable that most law-abiding Americans would be pretty excited about getting rid of this element in society. These are child traffickers, fentanyl traffickers, murderers. They're not who you want around, and they have no right to be here. But it's very interesting when you see the coordinated hyperventilation online of, well, this could go way further. So even if you point out that Tren de Aragua has no right to be here and they should be gone at all costs, that because something else might happen because Trump, it's time to feel like we shouldn't remove these cartel gangsters from the United States. And I don't believe that. And I think it is problematic that we have this kind of coordination around that message, because if the answer is, well, everything is a threat here because it's Trump doing it and it might be bad, even if it's something that appears like a net good, like getting rid of murderous gangsters, then the answer is not hyperventilating online and sending out more tweets. The answer is running Congress people who can win in Missouri and making sure that whoever's the presidential candidate in 2028 has a chance at becoming president of the United States. And, we're on the way to the next national election in 26. And if people are interested in governing the United States of America and not leaving it, to the Trump people, who I fully admit look pretty weird, then getting all faux upset about these matters, that doesn't have nearly the impact of registering people to vote. Did you have a state chairman of the Democratic Party who failed to get out the vote? Did they suck in 2024? Then get them out. Get somebody else in the job who isn't dirty, like who isn't a foreign agent. And if you're not going to bother getting foreign agents out of the Democratic Party, then you don't have any business complaining about what the foreign agents in the Trump administration are up to. Especially since I don't think they have nearly as many foreign agents in this Trump administration as the last one. I think the last one had nothing but foreign agents in them, looking at John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Rudy Giuliani and them. But if you're not going to fix the Democratic Party, what chance do you have? Because the fix is in. I think there needs to be two healthy parties here that both have America's interests at heart and the ability to organize and win elections. And there's not nearly enough pressure on these organs of the Democratic Party, whether it's the party itself or the media that purports to be its unofficial communications arm, like MSNBC. I would posit that the people in the Democratic Party are not actually Democrats. They have a lot of foreign ties and a lot of organized crime ties. I tell you, there is a whole ton of organized crime ties to the Missouri Democratic Party. And if you don't like Trump, then get those guys out. It's not that hard. Like, go online and say, fire Russ Carnahan from the Missouri Democratic Party, because he sucks. He's not good at winning elections. He registered as a foreign agent, so he's not in violation, I don't think, based on what we know. He's not registered. He's not liable criminally under FARA because he's registered. Um, he just sucks at his job. It's okay. I wasn't really good at the snack bar in 1990 in Rutland, Vermont. I don't work there anymore. Wasn't my cup of tea apparently. So, if you really don't like Trump and you want different policies, then you got to win the election. And just saying that there's never going to be elections anymore, that worry is a replacement for doing the work that we need to do to earn this republic. It's not just keeping this republic. It's you got to earn it. You got to put in the work. And there's a lot of people that feel that as long as they are righteous and they've got feel-good lines about how righteous they are online, that replaces winning. You know, I would have loved to have someone other than Andrew Bailey be Attorney General of Missouri. He wasn't much my cup of tea. But he's who we have because there's no Democratic Party here. None. So. It was wonderful to be with you tonight. I apologize for the technical problems. I guarantee when I look back at this, I'm going to suffer over them a lot more than you. So I'm not happy about the sound problems, but I am happy about you, and I want to thank you for being with me here tonight. And please hit subscribe, leave a comment, watch my other stuff, and I'll see you everywhere that I see you digitally.